Hi everyone, it's Neil from Diagonal Move. Osprey Games have been kind enough to send me a copy of Crescent Moon, the latest big box release from them. It's designed by Steve Mothers and features art from Naveed Rahman. The game is a 4 to 5 player area control game set during the 10th century, and players will vie for control of various parts of the Middle East and will be one of 5 unique factions attempting to do that particular task. The game itself has 5 player booklets, 82 cards, 59 wooden pieces, 16 hex, many tokens, some cloth bags and some discs. It's for 14 plus, takes about 3 hours to play. It is a 4 and 5 player only game and it is competitive. Okay, let's take a quick look at what we get inside. And the first thing we see is this rulebook. It's quite a large rulebook and has obviously the flavor text about the game and a historical note about the time and regions in which the game is set. It's an abstracted game, and so although it does feature the period of history where the Seljuks, the Ghaznavid dynasty, the Fatimids and the Byzantine Empire were operating and were in existence, it is largely an abstracted interpretation of that time. And there is a note here about the artwork and the design and how the origins of the art that you see in the game are from the art history of the region. The game has, as you can see, a whole bunch of components with 5 distinct factions, each with their own distinct components and with their own distinct actions within the game. The rulebook itself is very big, very clearly laid out, with a great deal of illustrations and some clear guidelines on how to play. This is very much an asymmetric game where the rulebook covers the overall rules of the game, but there will be other individual player aids that cover the unique factions and some of their objectives and their the aims and strategies behind how to play each of those factions. We do have 5 factions: the Warlord, the Murshid, the Sultan and the Caliph. In a 5-player game you would also have the Nomad faction, and there are some generic information about factions and about actions and about cards, and a brief overview of some of the unique actions that each side has, and then some more detail about combat and about influence contests, and then finally some of the detail on the unique attributes of the individual factions before taking a look at the various setups you can have depending on the number of players that you have in the game. So it's a very nice nice glossy rulebook, very clear it seems, with a range of useful illustrations, and finally a quick reference guide on the back. In terms of components, what else you get inside the box? You have a bag full of bags, which is always helpful, and then these really rather lovely wooden pieces representing the palaces and the forts and the towns and the cities of the games. And there's quite a bunch of these, and each player will have their own unique set of them, and they will be reflected in the actions as well. I believe only one faction can actually build towns or cities, only one faction has a palace, that kind of thing, but there's a whole bunch of these wooden blocks in various sizes and types, and they're really nice wooden blocks as well. Well painted and chunky pieces. It's going to be a good looking game when you get all these things up on the board, I'm sure. In addition to unique buildings, we have a set of tokens, and again these are unique to the players. So for example, these are the Warlord tokens here. The 2 yellow ones are actually to track the turn order. We'll come back to that in a moment, but these are unique to the Warlord faction. You have camels on one side and blank on the other, representing mercenaries or ordinary units. There are quite a lot of soldiers, as you might expect for a warlord faction, and then varying similar counters for the other factions in various types and guises. And again, these are different depending on which faction you're in, and so on. All those components do require some bags to keep them in, and rather than having just baggies, we do have these lovely cloth bags, again in the different faction colours. So we have the warlord, the murshid, the sultan, the caliphate, and then finally the nomads. And as far as I can tell from a skim of the rules, the bags really are there to hold the components. They have no particular influence on gameplay in terms of drawing. There's no draw out of the bag mechanic as far as I can work out, but there's just a lovely touch there of how to store all those wonderful wooden components in the correct proportions for your players to help set up. I do have the different player aids which go into much more detail about individual factions. There are 5 of them, as you might expect. You do have the Sultan with the influence action, then build action, hiring mercenaries, bribing mercenaries, and buying the power cards. And then on the inside you have a faux handwritten note from an old advisor giving you some strategy tips on how to play the game. And then there are unique attributes, and then the individual objectives for this faction, and those objectives appear to change over the course of time, with the first round being a year 1 objective that's only scoreable in that round, followed by a number of other objectives applicable in other rounds in the game. And then finally there's a handy reference chart, and if I just show the warlord next to that, you can see a sense of how the costs for the different buildings differ in terms of income at the top there, and then more income you get from destroying the city or from the strength and so on of the different buildings and units that you have. So quite different even in just a simple look at those 2 tables. You can see where some of the differences do lie. The warlord is a much more combat orientated faction than the one we just looked at, and you do have slightly different rules for the different actions, and then unique actions as well, but the broad layout is the same in terms of how you read and understand the player aid. Interestingly, it does say, as the most aggressive player, it will fall to you to prevent any of the other players from building up too much of a lead. So it sounds like there's going to be an element of collaboration between players in order to ensure victory of one. Always an interesting concept that I find. Okay, and then I showed on the back previously. The Murshid here, more of a religious order rather than a combat order. Again, you have influence on the cards. It seems you look at the top 7 cards of the action deck and take 1 card. And again, unique ability to interfere and meddle gives you a sense straight away of the sort of faction this might be. And controlling the holy sites is one of the key aims of that faction. Again, we have different costs there, income, and then combat strengths. The Caliph are another faction. Again, various detail about the different actions. The bribe mercenaries is for 5 players only. And then the unique attributes there. It's cheaper to build this, using this faction than any others. So that's straight away a difference that's probably going to be quite important compared to some others. And here you seem to gain income for the influence of another faction. So there's going to be some definite collaboration in an attempt to win the game for some of these factions, I think. And then finally we have the 5th player faction. So this is only applicable in the 5th 5-player game. And again, we have some advice and some scoring rounds, and here you can buy victory points, which is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. And you can recruit into hexes where you do not have any presence and no one has control. No one else can do that. Very interesting. Okay, cool. But before I get too wound up in the factions, let's have a look at some of the other things in the game. We do have a bunch of these token boards with the different influence counters, the coins, the Crescent Moons here are the victory point tokens, and then we have the markets where you buy the different cards in the game. And there is another market, Caliphate and Sultan tokens, and some more coins and victory point counters. Very nice thick tokens. They pop out as easy as you'd expect from this type of punch board. Very good quality stuff, it seems. Another board with what's called the middle market this time, and then more influence tokens and score victory point tokens. And then finally we have the Sultan's market. So the Sultan player has their own card market that they can draw from or they can use. And then we have the Warlord's influence tokens, and I believe that is called a challenge token. And then we have a not scoring a year tracker. The game takes place over a number of years, and within those years each player will have a preparation phase, a certain amount of actions they do before moving to scoring, and then the next year. The total number of years is 3, unless you choose to play the longer game, which is then 4 years. So it's quite a tight game. There's just, 16 actions in the long game, it looks like, but I'm sure there's plenty of area control goodness in those actions. Speaking of areas, we do have these tiles, and these tiles are lovely. They are what's going to form the basis of the areas you're controlling, and there are a number of pre-designed setups, plus there is also a set of rules for the variable setup, so to speak, and I'm just popping these out just to get a sense of what everything will look like on these maps, because these components are very nice indeed and they look really cool on the board. You can imagine some of these different tokens being in different places, and it looks very nice indeed. A lot of good table presence, I imagine, as you place all of these different counters around the board, and you have the different types of terrain and the holy site and various other things on the board. Very nice looking play area with a lot of variability built into it, it seems. And finally we have these cards, this great big deck of cards here, which have the various cards that will go into these markets, and you can acquire these throughout the game through various actions, some of which do have allegiance to certain factions. In fact, they all seem to have allegiance to certain factions, which is going to be intriguing. I have to see how that works, but it seems like you do have a number of cards available that do have benefits for some factions over others. That'll be interesting. Reference cards for combat and influence, political and military contests there. Card is decent quality, nice card. Should be a lot of fun to play. And then some reserve cards for 3 of the factions. Maybe there's another couple somewhere, I'm not sure at the moment. Maybe there's only the 3 factions with reserve cards. Anywho, that is Crescent Moon, latest game from Osprey. I can't wait to play this one, it's really right up my street. Hopefully that has given you a similar sense of what's inside the box and whether or not you would like to know more about this game when it does hit the shelves soon. Thank you very much. My name's Neil, and this has been Diagonal Move, and I'll see you next time.